Everyone wants to win, but in our modern society, we've taken it to extremes. Our hyper-focus on winning has a massive cost. Today, we're again speaking with Dr. S.J. King, author of The Inner Compass, Navigating Life's Uncertainties in a Complex World. Stephen, you said something that really blew my mind. You said, we all wear masks, and winning and success reinforce that mask, and then we eventually become that mask. Why is that a problem, and what do we need to know about that?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. It's good to be back. Yeah, I think the question we're here to answer is, what's the challenges of being successful? What's the challenges of winning? And how do you avoid some of the downsides? And I think the idea of masks is a pretty well-known concept. We all wear a mask to the world. And most of us wear many masks. We might wear one to church, one to work, one with family. You know, we'll wear a set of masks. The mask that makes us successful, is ordinate, right? And you learn to wear it your whole life. And by the time you know that you have one, you can't remember who you are without it. That's not a flaw. That is the mechanism. It's almost like the mask. And I said earlier, it was jokingly, like a Doctor Who episode gets stuck to your face, right? And then you become it. You become that mask. And a good example of this is people who spend their lives in a given career as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a CEO, as whatever, a sports person. And often what's said is that when people retire, they die pretty quickly. And I think part of that is because they have no notion of themselves in the world outside of that mask, right? And so the question is, well, how do you avoid that?
Right.
Yeah. Right. And I think, unfortunately, like I said, it's a mechanism. You don't avoid it. You need to befriend it. After all, that is how you are perceived in the world, largely.
Right.
And so the mask got you here. It didn't break you. What breaks you is not knowing you're wearing one.
Right.
And so that is the challenge, is to spend the time. And I don't think it's difficult, but what would I say? I would say, don't believe your own bullshit.
Okay.
The step is just realizing that you have many masks, and that your doctor mask or your lawyer mask or whatever it is that you're wearing is, yes, a part of you, but it's not all of you.
Right.
And take the time to unpack that. Is there a process for that? I think it's more of an awareness of yourself. So when you are in that situation, in that emergency room, in that courtroom, whatever it happens to be, by all means, act in accordance with that, but go, wait, this isn't really me. This is a mask I'm wearing in order to be successful in this world. Right. And pose that question to yourself. So that's how I think about the mask, and how, in many ways, it takes over, in a way, who you are. But the second part of this discussion is, and we'll come back and talk about this, but the second part is that, for me, and I think of the mask as, the largely a Joseph Campbell idea, and there's a Carl Jung idea about the shadow, right? And the shadow is not bad stuff, but it's the stuff you repress. It's the parts of yourself that you've hidden. so long you've forgotten they're yours. They don't disappear, but they're there. My notion would be that that shadow is cast, I like that, cast by that mask, right? Meaning, in order for that mask, that part of you to be successful, it represses ideas and thoughts and notions, maybe of who you are, in order to reinforce the success of the mask, right? Of that part of your persona.
Right.
And so the shadow builds with the ideas that are you, self in the Hindu sense, are you, but are not conscious, not present, right? They're in the shadow. So so we've got this self-observation to understand the mask, but how do we understand what our shadow is?
Right.
And this is fascinating for me, because it turns out that you don't have to look internally to try and discover your shadow.
Okay.
Because the shadow projects externally.
Right.
Now, how does it do that? So on the one hand, we have a mask that we're wearing. On the other hand, we have the shadow projecting out into the world. And the way it shows up is in the things that infuriate you.
Okay.
Right? Because every person, every object, every person is a mirror of your shadow. Right? So this means that if you are irritated with a loved one, with your wife, if you see things at work that drive you crazy, those are probably more about you than about them. Now, it turns out you could actually test that. And the testing is with a third person, especially a mentor. And when I think about a mentor, I like the Sufi definition, which really talks about a mentor not as an expert, not as somebody you pay to know something, but as a mirror who will simply basically tell you the truth. Good friend, maybe, but somebody that will be honest and open and act as a mirror. You can ask them, do you see it too?
Right.
And if they agree, then maybe it is an issue with the other person. But largely, I think you'll find they'll say, actually, I'm not seeing the same thing you are. Right. In which case, what's being uncovered there is your shadow. And I'll just give you a few examples. Okay. So, and these really come more from the workplace, but these are what I'll call 3 shadow frameworks. One, competency. Competent authority will often hide a shadow of domination and control. Mentor hides a need for validation.
Okay.
Visionary hides a fear of being trapped. Right. Now, I'm not saying that to point fingers at people who are those things, but just as a teaser as to what they could see possibly in themselves.
Right.
So if you're seeing some of these things in the world around you, you can reflect back on yourself. So we have the mask, and then we have the shadow. Now there's a paradox about these things, which is when you need to understand them most is when you are in crisis.
Crisis. Yep.
Right. And so let's say, and you asked me this last week, I think. So let's say somebody is lost their job, loss of a loved one, real crisis in your life. That's when your, wrong word maybe, but insecurity in the lack of, in the mask being gone, right? Because the crisis strips it away in a sense. it's when you need to do this work. But the interesting thing is, by not asking you to go internally in a time of crisis, which means to go into the world of trauma and emotion, you can still look externally, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I can still look externally, and there's some interesting books like on trauma and anxiety and a whole bunch of things that at those times you've actually stripped away the armor, so you're more accepting of this kind of, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm not just this. Maybe
Right.
I should transition to something that's more congruent with who I really am. Maybe I should pay attention to what I'm seeing in my wife that's really about me. So crisis is, I'm not trying to, not trying to by any means to suggest it's not a huge issue, emotional issue, but it does pull down your barriers. And if you can look externally at the shadow and at the mask, you will develop. Some would suggest that you learn more during a few months of crisis than you do years of success.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so for instance, when you receive feedback, it may well sting, but it could just be the shadow knocking. When people leave a relationship with you, it could just be telling you about you.
Mm-hmm.
What infuriates you in your workplace, you frankly likely created it. How often is it that somebody that's in a complex projects that onto the world, up to and including the world responding by delivering back on that complex? So for instance,
Right.
Somebody that is, I'll use a archetype, a caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing they want is to be in a relationship with somebody with an addiction. And yet that often happens because that person subconsciously creates the situation into which the addict can survive, right?
Right.
So you
That's
kind of co-create that world.
right.
And strangely, the more certain you are about it, that's where shadow lives. Because certainty is just an emotional trait of that mask, if you think about it.
Right. Right. Okay.
Right. So on this, I guess I know I've gone around in circles a little bit, but I would say catastrophe and crisis is not a gap in your development. In many ways, it was the development.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can uncover one disowned trait or identify a characteristic of the mask you're wearing, don't fix it, befriend it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the befriending it, because if we reject it, we're just creating more shadow.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes, that's exactly right. And I went through that myself, because I went from my mask being somewhat successful leader in the software and technology industry.
Very successful.
Well,
yeah.
to not liking it. I literally got to a point where I could see the mask and I didn't like it. I remember early on thinking, because I didn't identify it separate, I demand loyalty. I demand people to do what I tell them to do. And and I demand to know everything that's going on. Those are my three caveats. I don't think that's entirely unusual. But if you put it in the perspective of a mask, that's not very healthy. It's not trusting. It's not getting the most out of people. It's not driving passion or purpose. And I went on a pretty overt journey to try and move away from that. I'm not sure, Jonathan, if I was moving more towards myself, because I think that's pretty difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly felt better, which probably means I was moving more towards self, right? So, because self exists in the felt arena, it doesn't exist in the head arena.
So let me ask you this. There's the old concept of I contain contradictions and multitudes, and that we have different roles, which in a sense are different masks, right? When you're a father, you have a role in that family, in the relationship. You have a corporate role. You might have a role with your fraternity or your university and things that you still do with them and teach there. So you've got these multiple things. And I'm sensing that maybe there's an element of these masks are a constellation of masks. And when the balance of them feels right and you're able to authentically come through in a mask or a series of masks, then things are in balance. And when we're winning so much that we become just the hyper successful, the family goes to shit, your health goes to shit, all this goes out the window because you're just laser focused on this. The balance is so out that spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, we sense it internally, unconsciously perhaps, and then we begin to dramatize it in other ways.
I think that's exactly right. And I don't think, I don't think that you have to go on a quest to find the one true self in that.
Right.
I think the one true self is perfectly capable of holding the tension of multiple masks. What you need to do is to hold that, right? You need to know that you don't have to be one. You don't have to bring your work home. You don't have to bring your work to church. You don't have to bring your church to preaching to friends. All of these, that's a personal belief. After all of those, or your politics for that matter, all of those are simply a set of masks that you're perfectly capable of judging. But so much so that you just don't want to allow the dominant one, which is for most people career, to be overly reinforced by success and winning, to the extent that it takes your mind away from everything else.
Right.
That was your first point. You had a second point, and I can't remember what it was now. But I was just trying to think about personal examples. But
I'm thinking about
in this world I'm in now, really, which is writing and speaking and teaching. That mask, and I think it's largely the same mask, but that mask can, for me at least, get too cerebral, too in its head, and not emotional, and so much in its head that it doesn't believe it needs the body. Now, what do I mean by that? I tend to read and study and write and not work out.
Right.
And I like to think that the first step is that realization, right, of that mask. So so that mask has a shadow that I'm trying to unpack, and I have excuses. 20 years of rugby, but even so, I use that simply as an example. On the one hand, mask, and on the other hand, the shadow that mask is occluding or creating.
Right. Right. So maybe there's a piece, Erik Erikson had the stages of life, right? Especially talked about men, because that was that era, men in the stages of life. And as we get to the point where we've accrued a tremendous amount of success and we get older, we tend to move more into wanting to either go into contribution or stagnation. And so perhaps what you're doing is there's a reconstellation, if you will, of masks and a more priority towards going internally to the mental, psychological, and emotional part. And that's what you're doing with that, as opposed to the body has less value. When we're young, it's all about the body, at first, right? When you're in your early 20s,
Yeah.
working out, things like that. And there's a shift. And I'm wondering if this is just part of a natural shift, and that the awareness of that actually changes the way the shift happens.
That all feels very Maslowian to me, and I'm really not a fan of those kind of systems.
Yeah, sure, okay.
Because I think there's way more variety. But what I would say is, as you age, there's a point at which I don't know, but there's a point at which it gets to be too late. You are the mask.
Mm.
And if you think about that, how do you then change? How do you go?
Right.
Not that people don't do this, but how do you say, oh, I want to be retired. I'm not going to go to work every day. I want to focus on golf or prayer or whatever it happens to be.
Right.
When your mask is about success. And in fact,
Right.
I'm giving I'm doing a podcast with UBS, big bank,
Mm-hmm.
about what happens when you sell your company.
Mm.
Because it's the same thing. Because if you think about a founder building a company, they are completely entrenched, probably, in that company and the success of that company. And when that company goes, it's the same sort of crisis as we're talking about. And I think that hopefully that you can break out of that. And I think you can at most stages, but to your stage point. But I think that it's going to get harder and harder.
Yeah, let me ask you this, because we've had a number of conversations, and the world is changing at an incredibly rapid rate. I mean, it's the event horizon has collapsed, as the pilots would say, right? We're in the fog. And how do we change our masks at the speed of the reality around us changing, right? So how much is AI? How much is the new economy? How much are the politics and the radical changes in the world? How much is all that going to change how we see ourselves in our masks? And I'm framing that because one of the things I keep hearing is that the older folks, from the younger folks, the older folks aren't changing fast enough, and they're trying to cling to the old world, as one might imagine, and they're basically clinging to their masks.
Yes. Well, I'll just say a couple of things there. One, I've known you for many years, and you have never clung to a mask. I've seen you gone through all sorts of personal developmental changes and tried different careers and all the rest of it. So you may actually be better at answering that question than most people, and maybe you could do one of your shows on that. In terms of the space of time that the world is changing, what would I say? I would say you can no longer become attached to a mask. I mean, it's literally, I'm not sure you can even be attached to one career.
Right.
At least not in the same way that we used to. Even jobs like, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I would imagine are changing dramatically around you.
Yes.
And so your worldview needs to be constantly changing. So in some ways, this change in the world is forcing a change in this perspective, which could be viewed as a good thing. People opening up to new things. But if we also think about organizations as personas, so we give it vision, values, I believe that an organization can also have a shadow.
Mm-hmm.
It can also have masks. They're called brands that it
Right.
uses to the world. And it can also have an archetypal energy. We call it culture. So we can think about organizations in that way. You and I were talking about this before the podcast about education.
Right.
Universities are very stuck to their masks.
Right. Yes.
And education is very stuck to its masks. And I think the challenge is more for them than it is for us as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals are pretty resilient. Institutions have a tendency to keep, like lemmings, keep on doing what they've been doing, even when faced with overwhelming reality that they're heading in the wrong direction.
Right. Yep.
So I think in some ways the changes you're talking about, the speed of change, forces us to keep rethinking these things. And if you're not, that's another issue. And we talked about this in terms of followers before, right?
Right.
So that's another issue. But if you are, I think that's healthy. But organizations, if you agree that you can personify them, have a much more entrenched trajectory.
Right. Right. So the CEO, the owner, the top level C-suite, they align around the organization, or they either drive it or they align around it if they come in when the organization already exists, right? So a new CFO or someone comes in, they're going to put on the mask of the brand that exists, the organizational cultural structure. How does the C-suite, how do the owners and the CEOs and the major players adapt to this radically changing world in terms of masks? What would you say to them? What do they need to learn that maybe they're not seeing?
Well, remember the question. I'll just come back on it in a second. But I think the first thing you said is really interesting, and I've talked about this in my MBA class. In Oregon, the best and brightest, generalization, all want to work for Nike or Intel, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right.
It turns out that if you're not a natural fit, and I mean that at the kind of story level, archetypal, are you, if you want to work at Nike, are you a warrior, for instance? I mean, after all, their motto is just do it, with capital letters. It's not very warm or welcoming or nurturing. So you will fit in, right? You will have to, otherwise you'll get overlooked. It's called being ostracized.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you fit in is because you will co-create. So you, ego, the culture of the company will co-create that mask. We didn't really get into that, but that's how I think masks are created, by the culture and the ego. So, so now over time, that mask, going back to where we started, starts to get stuck. But you're in a world that started off not being about a match with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's got to, if there's any one thing that creates unhappiness, that has to be up there, because you're literally every day wearing a mask to serve the place you work that is not coherent with who you are. So and that goes for the entire organization, up to and including the CEO. How would you do something about it? I think the most important thing you can do as a senior manager or a CEO is to understand the culture. And I mean that below behavior. So understand the intrinsic nature of an organization and go with it. Doesn't mean you can't do stuff, but don't try and stand up with it, fight it. I mean, I think the world is full of CEO hubris versus company culture, and I can tell you who's won most of the time. And so that, where does, hubris comes from, this confidence of a mask, right? That's what hubris is. I don't think hubris is intrinsic. It's not like fundamental for you as a human, I don't think. But
Okay.
but it gets reinforced within an organization, right? Through socialization and all the rest of it. And so I think what you need to do is to kick yourself in the ass and say, I need to make sure I understand this organization at a fundamental level. And in doing so, I need to strip away my own preconceived notions and figure out how I can work with what's there.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think
Are you so? Go ahead.
so. Two answers. Sorry, I was just trying to see if
Yeah.
anything else came up, but
Yeah. So I was going to ask in relation to this, does someone need to, well, I guess first you said, as you mentioned in the beginning, you get the awareness. You get the awareness, I'm wearing a mask. I didn't know it. Suddenly I find
Right.
myself wearing a mask. I can tell that there's a distance or a separation between Jonathan as mask and Jonathan as everyday guy sitting at home wearing a shirt. And
Right.
so that awareness is stage one. Then there's a not knowingness, I think, for 99 point, go out, a number of decimal points, percentage of us that go, well, what now? How do I sit with this, not knowing this? Because, we're supposed to know in our modern world, right? Everybody has to know, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here? Etc.
I think those are different things.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One is the cultural reinforcement of the mask, which could be, here's how we act in this world. This is what it means to be an American. Here's traditionally how people have won, right? Workers need to be repressed. All sorts of
Right.
myths that come at us all the time. I think that the challenge when we hear those is not to blindly accept them.
Mm-hmm.
You can parse them. That doesn't mean you don't decide, I'm going to go along with it.
Right.
Because at my company, liking football is what most people talk about.
Right.
So I'm going to like football. For instance, that's fine. What's not fine, but what is maybe something you should think about is when that starts to become ingested, where it's no longer part of your projection out to the world. I had a good friend, actually ended up being a very successful business person, and he literally came to the conclusion that he needed to understand football. He wasn't a football guy, never grew up that way or anything else. Right. And he would listen in the car to the radio broadcasts of football matches, and that you can listen to football commentators all day long.
Right. Yeah.
But he always knew that really wasn't what he was passionate or interested in about, but he needed to know that in order to wear that mask.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if I'm being straightforward. Maybe you could help, but I think that's what I think the difference is. It's not that you shouldn't do things. It's just that you should know what you're doing. And there's some great there's examples of this, right? I think maybe less today, but in my era, being a person of color, being a woman, having a certain sexual orientation, it was very difficult to bring that into, we're talking a lot about workplace, so it's into that workplace culture.
Right.
And so they wouldn't have to, but they would often play act, right? They would have a set of behaviors and attributes that would fit into the external culture.
Right.
I think that's absolutely fine until it starts to turn around and start to get stuck with you. I mean, because that's, again, a place of unhappiness.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so there's a transition point that might happen for some people where it's like, I know I'm creating, I don't know the terminology perhaps, I'm creating an alter ego so that I can fit in better at work. So I hang out more with the next tier up. So, I'm dressing like them, I'm coming in earlier, staying in late, talking like they talk about the football team they love and so forth. And then eventually the challenge is, do I become that? Or am I still always going to have that alter ego? And what level of alter ego is considered authentic, right? And does that become a point?
I think that's absolutely right. In fact, I had a boss at work, happened to be a person of color, and he would literally talk about dressing the right way, acting the right way. That was the secret. Right. He even told me off for wearing Argyle socks to work at one point.
Okay.
But and there was even a book, I think, called The Dress for Success. And so yep. I'm not criticizing any of those things. I'm saying don't let them get stuck.
Right.
Because you may have to do that. Like I said, if you want a career at the top company in your field, there's you may have to act that way.
Right. Don't wear a Men's Warehouse suit if you get hired on to a $300,000 a year, straight out of law school, white shoe law firm in New York City.
Yeah, wasn't there a Tom Cruise movie about that?
I think there was.
He was a lawyer and then he was asked to do stuff that he just didn't agree with. I remember, or something like that. So,
yeah, I think those stories, and they're part of the. Maybe that's part of the way that the culture expresses understanding. We know there's shadow here, through our movies.
Right. We know there's shadow. Yep.
Right. And it's sort of like funny, the Wolf of Wall Street, greed is good. Some people recognize that as a shout of shadow, and other people said that's a great idea. Let's follow that. So it can be.
But it's not my place. Maybe it's not our place to judge that.
Right.
It's just I hope both of those people are reflecting that as masks, because they both are masks, either side of that.
Yep.
Back on who they are, right? What feels right for me. So if you judge the Wolf of Wall Street because you're enmeshed in a culture that sees that kind of greed as bad,
right?
What's your opinion? And vice versa. If you're enmeshed in a culture that sees that kind of greed as good, what's your opinion? And you don't necessarily have to resolve the opinion. You just have to know that there's two pieces going on here.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's almost like you can't have a mask without having shadow, right? And so if that's the case, then we're shifting between alter egos, and different identities, if it were. I would call it inhabitations rather than identity. But if we go through that process, maybe using one identity, like the father identity, to look at the work identity, then using the work identity to look at the athlete identity or the physicality identity. So from those different points of view, we can begin to really get a multiplex view of ourselves, and then see our shadow from different positions.
And not yes, but not only that, but that's where mentors come into.
Yes.
I think it's hard not to have a mentor, and sometimes I think my wife fills that role for me, and sometimes the notion of brutal honesty goes a little bit far. So, but it's very hard to see yourself. In fact, when I was at business school at Wharton, we did these exercises, and there would be a leader and an employee. I think there may have been middle managers, and then their employees, and then there would be an observer.
Mm-hmm.
And almost always the most profound observations came from the observer.
Yeah.
So much so that I think that therapy should be 3 people: the therapist, the client, whatever you want to call them, the patient, and an observer. Because it's very difficult to be in dialogue with somebody and observe at the same time.
You're always part of it. You're
Yes.
in the context. You're inside the context. I think
Right. Right.
Ken Wilber calls it 3-2-1. So, but
Yeah. I certainly think that you need an observer.
Right.
You need a mirror. And we could talk about that another day, because I don't think it's what we typically think of as mentors.
I would love to talk about that. There,
I don't think they have to be smarter. I don't. In fact, in the Sufi tradition, you can't have a mentor who's paid, which makes it, when you think about it, an awful lot of sense, right? So,
right, because who's paying the bill? It's in the context.
Right.
Heinlein, I think it was Heinlein and Stranger in a Strange Land, if I have the right author and book, had something called a fair witness.
Yeah, perfect
Right.
term. Yeah.
That was their only job, was just to witness with the greatest clarity possible, and then to report exactly what they witnessed.
Yep.
Stephen, let's do this. I want to have that next conversation. Right now, we're up against our time, and I'm so grateful. It's been really wonderful. And how would you leave the audience today? What would you? Do you have any suggestions, any thoughts, any closing ideas that you want to leave with them, or exercises, or?
Well, an exercise is to, like I said at the end of that, which was to think about a disowned trait. So that would be something in your shadow. So I'm not suggesting it's bad.
Right.
And befriend it.
Okay.
I think that's useful. And I know this stuff is paradoxical, hard to understand. There's resources out there. I talk about a lot of this on my Substack in the book, and you don't have to go to the deepest, darkest, depths of academia.
Right.
So I think there's ways through that, and I think we've gone through a lot here. And like I said too, listen to you, because you've done a great job of doing this.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for today. Again, this is S.J. King, Stephen King, Dr. Stephen King, author of The Inner Compass, Navigating Life's Uncertainties in a Complex World. And that's what we've been talking about today. Stephen, what's the name of your Substack so people can find you?
Yeah, most everything I do is under Surfacing Wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surfacingwisdom.substack.com.
Wonderful. We'll put that down in the show notes. Delighted to have you here again. Can't wait for our next conversation. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you.